You ever notice how some people have a very specific calm about them? Not the I meditate and journal calm, but the unshakable kind. The kind where they don't rush, don't overshare, don't panic when plans fall apart. They'll listen quietly, nod once, and say something like, "We'll figure it out." And somehow, they always do. If you've ever felt that way, or noticed it in someone older, there's a good chance the roots go all the way back to the 1960s. People who grew up in that decade carry a psychology that feels foreign today. Not better, not worse, just different. Shaped by a world that was louder in some ways, quieter in others, and far less padded than the one we live in now. And if you grew up then, or were raised by someone who did, parts of this might feel uncomfortably familiar. Let's talk about why. First, picture childhood in the 1960s. No phones, no constant supervision, no instant rescue. If you went outside, you were gone. Adults didn't track you. They trusted you, or at least expected you to manage. You learned your boundaries through experience, not warnings. Scraped knees, wrong turns, getting yelled at by a neighbor instead of a notification from an app. Psychologically, this built something rare today: internal navigation. People who grew up in the 60s learned early that the world would not constantly explain itself to them. You figured things out by watching, trying, failing, and adjusting. That's why so many from this era still have that quiet confidence that says, "I'll handle it," even when the situation is unclear. Then there's the emotional environment. Many children of the 1960s were raised by parents shaped by war, depression, or post-war scarcity. These were not emotionally expressive households. Love was shown through providing, fixing, showing up, not through constant verbal affirmation. So, kids learned to read between the lines. If this was your upbringing, you probably developed a strong emotional radar. You noticed tone, silence, mood shifts. You learned when to speak and when not to. Psychology calls this situational awareness, but back then it was just survival. You learned that emotions existed, but they weren't always discussed. They were managed privately. This often creates adults who are emotionally steady but not emotionally loud. You feel deeply, but you don't announce it. Then there's another profile that shows up again and again in people who grew up in the 60s, the early realist. Imagine being a kid who watches adults work hard, repair things instead of replacing them, and carry responsibility without dramatizing it. You didn't grow up with the idea that life was supposed to be easy or fulfilling all the time. Life was life. You adapted. Psychologically, this creates resilience, but also practicality. People from this era tend to ask, "What needs to be done?" before asking, "How do I feel about this?" Not because feelings don't matter, because action was prioritized early on. If this resonates, you might notice something about yourself. You don't romanticize struggle, but you're not shocked by it either. Problems don't feel personal, they feel logistical, something to work through, not post about. Then there's the relationship with authority, and this is where the 1960s get interesting. This was a decade of massive social change, civil rights, protests, cultural shifts, questioning systems. Watching adults disagree loudly about politics, war, morality, and the future. Even as a child, you absorbed the tension. So, people who grew up in the 60s often developed a balanced skepticism. They respect structure, but don't blindly trust it. They can follow rules, but they also know rules can be wrong. This creates adults who are independent thinkers, often suspicious of extremes and uncomfortable with group hysteria. They don't jump on trends quickly. They wait. They observe. They've seen enough cycles to know that loud certainty doesn't always mean truth. Another profile that emerges is the self-contained adult. If you grew up without constant emotional validation, you learned to generate your own. Praise wasn't guaranteed, attention wasn't automatic, so you became internally anchored. You learned how to sit with yourself, how to be bored, how to be alone without feeling empty. Psychologically, this often shows up later as emotional independence. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't chase approval. You're not unsettled by silence in conversations. In fact, you might prefer it. This can make people from this generation seem distant or reserved, especially to younger people raised in a culture of constant feedback. But what's really happening is self-sufficiency. You learned early that your inner world had to be enough. And then there's the bridge effect. People who grew up in the 1960s lived in two worlds, one before technology reshaped attention and one after it exploded. They remember slow time, long days, conversations without distractions, and they also witnessed the acceleration, the noise, the speed, the pressure. That gives them a rare perspective. They know life can be quieter. They know the brain doesn't need constant input to function, and they often sense when modern life is overstimulating, even if they don't use that word. This is why conversations with them feel grounding. They're present, not scanning, not multitasking, just there. And that presence isn't trendy, it's learned. Now here's the twist. Growing up in the 1960s didn't make people emotionally perfect. It made them emotionally adapted. Some learned to suppress feelings. Some struggle to express vulnerability. Some carry stoicism a little too far. But what they gained was endurance, perspective, a tolerance for uncertainty that's becoming rare. So if you grew up in that era, or were raised by someone who did, ask yourself, do you rely more on inner stability than external reassurance? Do you handle stress quietly rather than loudly? Do you trust experience more than hype? And if you're from a later generation, maybe you've noticed this in parents, grandparents, mentors. That calm, that groundedness, that sense of we've been here before. So which part fits you? The quiet resilience? The emotional restraint? The skepticism? The self-contained calm? However this lands, one thing is clear. The psychology of people who grew up in the 1960s was shaped by a world that demanded responsibility before comfort and gave very little explanation along the way. And that kind of childhood leaves a mark. So, if this made you reflect on yourself or someone you know, sit with that for a moment. And if you want more psychology that explains people in ways you don't usually hear, you know what to do.